Hello guys, this is your friend and we are back with a new fanfic. And if you enjoy this fanfic, then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. And now let's start the fanfic.
There she stood watching as her husband's casket was lowered into the earth. He was a hero, he was a lover, and now all of that was taken from him far too soon. Tenten loved him with all her heart and soul. Naruto hadn't started off well, hell, he wasn't even on her radar of potential boyfriend material. When he was younger, he was loud, crude, obnoxious, and if the villagers were to be believed, a nuisance. It wasn't until after the Fourth Great War did she start to notice him. The way he selflessly came to the aid of others, the gleam he got in his eye when he saw the people closest to him smile. She would never be able to see it again. However, Naruto had sacrificed everything for this village growing up, and know he had finally sacrificed the one thing you can never get back, his own life. The day started off like any other. She woke up next to the man she loved. He would always wake up first, and when she finally woke, he would be staring down at her with love in his eyes. She kissed him, he kissed her, and eventually one thing led to another. Once they had finally got out of bed and showered, it was back to their lives. Naruto had completed his dream of becoming Hokage, and Tenten had taken over the weapons shop after her father passed away. It was all a normal day till a large glowing purple armor was seen advancing on the Konoha outer wall. It turned out that Sasuke Uchiha had finally come to make good on his promise of destroying Konoha. With him, it seemed he brought the remaining army of White Zetsu. In the end, Sasuke had failed. There had been casualties on both sides, and Naruto had been driven into a corner, so he used his final trump card. He unsealed the Kyuubi. In doing so, he had given his life for the village he grew up in, the same village that had hated him for many years of his life. Kurama sat and watched his previous host and partner being lowered into the ground. He felt a feeling akin to loneliness as he watched Naruto's wife cry silent tears. He wrapped one of his tails around her for comfort. She buried her face into his tail and wailed. "I can't believe he's gone," she sobbed. Kurama stared down at the human that was using him as tissue with sorrow-filled eyes. He could do something. It was forbidden even for the Biju, but he could do it. The giant fox sighed. He resigned himself to his decision. He doesn't have to be. Tenten looked up with tear-stained eyes. Wah. What? I can send you back before this, so far back that you could change his loneliness. Tenten's eyes widened with hope. Do it, she said without hesitation. She didn't care whether it meant traveling to the realm of the Shinigami. She was getting her husband back. Kurama nodded before weaving through a few hand signs. His body became chakra and it surrounded the brunette's body. She could feel her body moving on its own as it weaved some hand signs she didn't recognize. Her world turned black. She eventually woke up. Did it work? She looked around and saw a room she hadn't called hers in years. It was her dad's house right above their weapon shop. When am I? A few days before Naruto became a genin, the familiar voice of the Kyuubi spoke within her mind. She would be lying if she said she didn't freak out at first, but she was the wife of an Uzumaki, and if there were anything an Uzumaki does not do, is lie. Kurama, how can I hear you? Where are you? Inside your mind, child. This was the only way I could find. I turned you into a Jinchuriki in order for you to save Naruto from his loneliness. His words resonated within her. She was a Jinchuriki now, she was like him now. That train of thought brought a smile to her face. Then I can protect him. The fox smirked as he heard the girl's thoughts. She wasn't like Naruto was. She had no talent for keeping her thoughts to herself. Yes. This way, once we make contact with Naruto, I can share with him your memories. It'll be like having your husband back when he was 13. She slightly cringed at the thought of a 13-year-old husband. They couldn't do what a married couple could for another 2 years by Konoha law. A small price to pay for more time with him. Ten-chan, called the familiar voice of her father, Ojiro. She felt tears beginning to pool in the corners of her eyes. She had missed her father ever since he passed away a year after she and Naruto got married. Coming, she yelled back, Trying to keep the sobs back, she couldn't let him know she was crying. He would only ask questions that she couldn't answer without sounding like a nutcase. After calming down and wiping her tears, she left her room. Reaching their living room, she immediately smiled as she saw him, standing at 5 feet 9 with short brown hair. He wore a tan dress shirt tucked into a pair of black dress pants. Tenten questioned this. Was something important supposed to happen today? Ten-chan, did you forget? He said. She looked at him confused. We're visiting your mother today. She mouthed. Oh, before dashing back to her room. How could she have not known? Her father never dressed up for anything. Their annual visit to her mother's grave is the only time she didn't see her father. In that old leather apron, work gloves, a white shirt, and blue jeans. She sighed and opened her closet. What to wear? She decided upon a lovely knee-length red dress with golden floral prints. She wore her hair in her usual double buns. Once she was ready, she and her father left the house in the direction of the Konoha cemetery. Here lies Chi-Chi, mother, wife, friend. She sat in front of the gravestone as her father poured water over the stone and placed the ceremonial incense. They prayed together before he placed a hand on her shoulder and telling her that he'll see her at home. Tenten was incredibly grateful for this time. She was close with her mother ever since she was born. Hey, Ka-san, how are you? I suppose you know I'm not really 14, I couldn't turn down the fox's offer. I had to get him back. The memory of her beloved husband as she remembered him at the Chunin exams. She had the passing thought that he was cute but never would have imagined him being her husband at the time. She was scared to see him. In a strange way it felt as if he wasn't her Naruto. Sure, he'll grow up to be the man she fell in love with, but he's not currently hers. I hope you can give me courage. I'll be sure to make things right this time. She offered a silent, I love you, before turning and walking off. She smiled at the thought of seeing him again. She couldn't wait. I've got my second chance and I'll make everything right. One of Tenten's biggest regrets as a wife was never becoming a mother. They had talked about it and it seemed as if they were ready, but it never happened. Either she had missions that kept her away from home for weeks if not months at a time, or Naruto had Hokage duties that required his full attention. Not this time. This time she would have a much longer life with him. Naruto walked calmly through the streets of Konoha. It was a quiet and calm day. He hadn't pulled a prank all day and no one's tried anything with him. Plus there was his genin exam tomorrow. He couldn't wait, he was so excited. He was walking with his hands resting on the back of his head and his eyes pointed upward, so it was no surprise when he knocked into someone. He fell to the ground and his eyes went wide when he saw the person he had run into. She was stunning in her red dress. Her skin was light and creamy and those flower patterns on her dress were spectacular. She wore her brown hair up in twin buns at the back of her head. She stared at him and he stared at her in return. Oh Kami, it's him. Wah, what do I do? What do I say? Calm down girl, Kyuubi commanded. Tenten nodded before she noticed a hand held out to her. She followed the arm back to its source and found it connected to the man of her dreams. She took his hand and Naruto pulled her to her feet. Her hands are so soft. Naruto thought. The blush on his cheeks deepened as he pulled her too hard and she fell forward. Her body made contact with his. She blushed and felt her heart hasten. Calm down Tenten, it's just your husband, who doesn't know he's my husband. Sorry, he stuttered out while rubbing at the back of his neck. I guess I don't know my own strength. It's fine, no harm done. A moment of awkward silence passed between them. My name's Tenten, she said. Even if she couldn't tell him she was his wife yet, there was no way he wasn't going to know her name before the end of this interaction. Nice to meet you Tenten-chan, Naruto greeted. The chan suffix didn't go unnoticed by Tenten. My name's Naruto Uzumaki. Hello Naruto-kun, sorry for running into you. No, I am sorry, I wasn't paying attention to where I was going. I suppose I was too busy thinking about my genin exam tomorrow. She arched an eyebrow. That gives her a time frame of how far back she was. She remembered right, Naruto's control sucked. Genin exam, so you're going to be a ninja. Not just any ninja, I'm going to be Hokage one day, Naruto exclaimed. Tenten smiled at this. He definitely will become Hokage. He was inducted after they dated for 3 years. She blushed as she remembered his inauguration. It was a special day for them both. Not only did he finally achieve his dream after so many years, but he had to go and do something crazy. He proposed during his own inauguration. Well then, you must be really something, huh? I will be. I just have to get through the exam. This time, he tried to be as quiet as possible when he said those last two words, but to no avail. Tenten heard him clearly. This time, you having trouble with something. I've been a genin for a year already, maybe I can give you some advice. Naruto looked at her suspiciously. Well, I've got everything pretty much down, and I am pretty confident when it comes to the written portion. But I am terrible with the bunshin, Naruto explained. Tenten nodded. She remembered how he used to explain how terrible he was at it. She had come to know that he would never be able to perform something as simple as regular clone jutsu. Time to change that. You said your last name was Uzumaki, right? Yeah. Well then that could be your problem. Every Uzumaki is born with large chakra reserves which make basic jutsu like the bunshin next to impossible unless you have Jonin level control, she explained silently, thanking Naruto for explaining to her. It's kinda like overfilling a water balloon. But I am an orphan, I am sure they just gave me that name. She cursed. She had forgotten he was an orphan. He certainly never act like one. Not necessarily. A lot of times orphanages won't even bother giving you the last name. Like my teammate Rock Lee, what kinda idiot adult would name a kid Rock? Naruto looked unsure. Tenten wanted to assure him that yes, he was an Uzumaki, but she couldn't just come out with it and say, "Hey, Naruto-kun, my real name's Tenten Uzumaki, I am your wife from the future. I know stuff you haven't learned yet, like, you really are an Uzumaki and your mother was named Kushina Uzumaki. You worry too much. I think I worry just the right amount for a wife whose husband is 13 and has no idea who you are." Kyuubi rolled his eyes. Just make prolonged physical contact and I'll take care of the rest. She blushed at the thought of physical contact. If they were older it would have another meaning, but for them at their current age, what was she supposed to do? Hold his hand? She and Naruto walked until they found themselves at Training Ground 7, she had fond memories here. They had come here once and had a picnic together back when they were still just friends. He had passed it off as him just returning the favor after she helped him with his kenjutsu training. It was romantic. He had brought her to a red and white checkered blanket he had set up underneath a single tree that faced a large pond. It was halfway through the meal when he asked me to be his girlfriend. He was obviously out of his element and nervous, and it showed, but it also showed how sincere he was about it. She couldn't help but accept. They walked side by side. She noticed Naruto kept giving her side glances and bristled away when she tried to get closer until he just stopped walking entirely. She didn't notice at first, and when she did, she was about 3 to 4 feet away from the blonde. "What's wrong, Naruto-kun? What do you want?" Naruto exclaimed. His voice contained both anger and confusion, but they were mild compared to what she had felt in the past. Tenten was confused at first but quickly shook the confusion out of her head. Of course, he was trust issues. He was mistreated for the entirety of his life. It was no wonder why he was wary around strangers. He probably only followed her out here because she was a kid herself, even if mentally she's in her late 20s. She sighed and placed her left hand on her right shoulder. "Maybe I can use this. Bait him into a fight. He was always hot-headed growing up." "What do you mean, Naruto-kun?" She let her playful side out for a moment. He stepped closer to her and she could see he was getting angry. "I don't like being played with," he basically growled at her. Oh, she was getting him back for that one. He stepped closer. She stepped closer to the point they were inches apart. She knocked his feet out from under him. He fell to the ground with a small thud. She was on top of him in moments. Naruto panicked as he tried to free himself from underneath the girl, but it was a futile effort due to her being physically stronger. He cursed under his breath. I should have taken my training seriously. Tenten smiled as she placed both hands on his cheeks, successfully forcing his lips to pucker as she planted a kiss onto his. She couldn't have been happier. This was it, she had fulfilled her end of the bargain. She created the long physical contact. Well, it was going to be long if she had anything to say about it. Naruto's eyes widened as he felt her warm and soft lips on his. He didn't know what to think. Was this a new effort to poison him? Putting it in his food wasn't bad enough, they were putting it in lipstick now. He tried to resist but couldn't stop her from intruding into his mouth with her tongue. His and hers wrestled for supremacy as Naruto moaned into the kiss. If this is how I die, it's not so bad. That's perfect, Kyuubi exclaimed as their bodies started to bubble with the beast's red chakra. She cracked open her eyes to see his red demon eyes looking back into her own matching pair of red orbs before closing them and melting into the kiss. The Kyuubi's chakra making quick work of restoring Naruto's future memories. She could feel his hand caressing her cheek. She couldn't hold back any longer. She needed this. She needed the man she loved again. They parted. No evidence of their intimate moment except for the silvery line of saliva that connected the two. All the memories that he had spent with her started flooding back to him. Their first date, the second, how he proposed to her during his inauguration, the feelings of happiness and joy as the tears left her eyes, she couldn't say yes fast enough. The memories of their first time together, it was odd to watch himself having with his wife from her perspective, her father's death and how she didn't leave their room for weeks afterward. Naruto waited on her hand and foot every step of the way. Remembering his own death wasn't pleasant. After all he had done for the bastard, Sasuke still fell further into the darkness. He was beyond saving. He was reminiscing on the memories of the Kyuubi's offer and his wife's acceptance before he felt warm water droplets falling from the heavens. He opened his eyes and saw the most sinful thing he could imagine, tears streaming out of his lovely wife's wonderful eyes. He sat up still with his beloved in his lap. He felt tears pooling into his own eyes as he embraced her. He rubbed her back as he had done time and time again. He placed small butterfly kisses up and down her cheek. She wrapped her arms around his neck and buried her head into his shoulder. I've missed you so much, she managed to say between sobs. Shish. Shish, I know my love, I know, Naruto whispered into her ear as he gently stroked her back. He felt as if he should be angry with her for throwing away her future as she had done, but after the memory sharing, he couldn't really blame her. She was alone and scared. She felt as if her whole world had crashed down upon her. You know, experiencing from the perspective of the other person, might have been the weirdest thing I have ever seen. And I've seen Zetsu, Naruto joked. She chuckled as she lifted her head from his shoulder and placed her forehead onto his. They stared lovingly into each other's eyes for what seemed like forever. The couple sat together in Naruto's apartment. Tenten was curled up on the couch with her feet up as she lay on her husband's lap. Naruto smiled down at his wife's content face as he gently stroked her forehead with his thumb. She stared up at him. She had done it. She had her man back and there was nothing in heaven or hell that could take that away from her. Ten-chan, I should get you home before your Two-san starts to worry, Naruto said while rubbing her cheek with his thumb. Sure, he wanted her to stay. They were technically married, or at least as far as they were concerned, but to the outside world they were not, and a young maiden shouldn't be staying over her, now boyfriend, future husband's house. Can't I stay the night? She whined before adopting a sultry smirk. We could always. No, Ten-chan, we may be bound together, but I am still 13 while you're 14. Besides, if I accidentally got you pregnant at such a young age, your father would kill me. Tenten pouted. You're right, I am not looking forward to losing my virginity again, she said as she sat up. Naruto kissed her passionately before getting up from the couch and walking to the door. Says you, how many guys can say they claimed the virginity of the same girl twice? He joked as he walked out the door. She rolled her eyes before following close behind. Besides, I have a big day tomorrow and need my rest. Speaking of the Genin exam, what are you going to do tomorrow? What do you mean? Tenten rolled her eyes as she smiled. You know what I mean. Are you going to show them just what Naruto Uzumaki can do? Naruto pondered this for a moment while adopting a thinking pose. It was a good question. Along with her memories of their relationship, he received memories from Kurama about the life he lived without her. He had the knowledge to perform all the jutsu he had used in the future. He could intentionally fail and let the timeline play out just as it's meant to, or he could ace the test. The first time I failed and Mizuki Tem used that chance to get me to steal the forbidden scroll. No need putting myself in harm's way, he said after having decided to pass. Though he wouldn't go too far, no need raising suspicion. The test was simple enough. First a henge, then a kawarimi, and finally a bunshin. He could perform the henge and kawarimi in his sleep, and he had become so proficient with the kage bunshin to the point he didn't even need to make a hand sign in order to mold his chakra. It won't be too hard to pass, I might even get Rookie of the Year, he shrugged as they walked up to the front steps of her house. I have very little doubt in that, she said as she walked onto the front step. She turned around and stared at her beloved. She wanted to scream when she saw his orange jumpsuit. It had taken her months of constant work to get him to wear something a little more traditional for a ninja and ditch the full-body jumpsuit. Promise me you'll get some new clothes. Ah, he whines. But Ten-chan, orange is my favorite color. Well, you don't have to wear a full-body orange jumpsuit. She exclaimed. It wasn't a yell, but it wasn't an indoor voice neither. Fine. Thank you. He grabbed her hands in his own and smiled as she blushed. I love you, Ten-chan. I love you too, Naru-kun, she said before leaning in and giving him a chaste kiss before turning and moving back inside. It was such a long day, so much had happened, she was exhausted. But it seems she couldn't just go to sleep, because as she turned the corner to head up the stairs, she came face to face with her father, who wore a large smile that threatened to split his head in two. Naruto sat at his table as he ate a breakfast that consisted of a ham omelet. He had a big day today, which means he needed all the energy he could get. He wore a plain black shirt with the Uzumaki swirl in the center of his upper back and a pair of cargo shorts. Once finished with his meal, he deposited his dishes into his sink before slipping on his ninja sandals and walking out the door. Today was a fresh start for him. He couldn't afford to be the class clown he once was. He had a future to prevent, and nothing would get in his way. He walked through the streets in full view of everyone. He didn't care for the hateful glares or sneers he receives. This was him, and he wasn't going to feel ashamed for who he was. Admittedly, Naruto had muscle, though he hid it well underneath his usual baggy jumpsuit. He walked into class and immediately he could feel eyes on him. He looked up and saw the majority of the class staring at him, a multitude of this running through their minds, like how he wasn't wearing his usual orange or the fact that his muscle mass was rather impressive for someone of his age. He took a seat next to one of the only people he could call his friend, Shikamaru Nara. The Nara heir was a genius, there was no doubt about that, but his incredible brain was ever only matched by his incredible laziness. Hey Naruto, ready to fail again? Exclaimed the voice of Kiba Inuzuka from behind him. He turned and saw the feral boy smirking as if he had said the funniest thing in the world. He didn't offer much in the way of an answer other than a confident smirk of his own that seemed to work for Kiba. He turned around just in time to watch the daily spectacle of Sakura Haruno and Ino Yamanaka racing into the classroom in hopes of sitting next to Sasuke Uchiha. Ha! Beat you again, billboard brow. Are you blind, pig? I was clearly ahead of you. By a forehead maybe, Naruto mumbled. He had grown out of his crush for the Pinkett Banshee. All she cared about was Sasuke. It mattered very little what kinda awful things he had done, she would always support him. The two had actually dated before Naruto had fallen for Tenten. In fact, that may have been one of the deciding factors in his current relationship. One day while he and the Pinkett were getting intimate, she moaned out that traitorous bastard's name. That was the last straw for Naruto. He didn't know what to do, but one thing was clear: he had to get away from her. In the end, Tenten comforted a depressed Naruto and he ended whatever remained of his relationship with Sakura. Last he had heard, she left the leaf saying she was going to find the man she loved. Alright class, take your seats, Iruka Yumino said as he walked into the room. Naruto had to make a conscious effort not to run up to the man and tackle him with a hug. Iruka had been the one to attend his wedding in place of his own father. Then came the man Naruto most hated, Mizuki. Alright, let's jump straight into it. Mizuki-san and I will be conducting your graduation exams. Mizuki nodded and plastered a fake smile onto his face. The exam will be broken up into 4 portions: the written test, kunai and shuriken throwing, a taijutsu test, and finally the ninjutsu test, where you will be expected to do 3 jutsu. The henge, kawarimi, and bunshin. Naruto sighed as they started calling students. Sometimes he hated being an Uzumaki. It always meant that when something was done in alphabetical order, he would always be towards the last. He zoned out the Chunin as he began thinking about his beloved. She had done so much for him already, and he felt the need to do something for her. She uprooted her whole life and accepted a demon inside of her in order to travel back in time to be with him. What could he possibly do to repay that? Break. While Naruto was busy with his genin exam, Tenten was busy watching her father freak out about how his baby girl having her first boyfriend. "San, calm down," she exclaimed, having become tired of watching the man paise back and forth. He sighed before sitting down at the table in the chair just opposite from her own. "Okay. What's his name?" he said with a smile. He was very proud that his baby girl had found a boyfriend. He was worried that she would end up with one of the guys from her team. Not that they were bad guys, but they were strange. Neji was arrogant while Lee was just strange. "His name's Naruto Uzumaki," she said dreamily. Her father stiffened a bit before relaxing. He knew of Naruto and it pained him to see how others treated him. Being an ex-shinobi as well as owning a weapons shop, he was quite knowledgeable when it came to sealing scrolls. Naruto was just the scroll while the Kyuubi was the kunai. He smiled, glad his daughter didn't just follow the other children's lead and bully the boy. "What else can you tell me about him?" "He's the kindest, most caring person you'll ever meet. His dream is to become Hokage. His favorite color is orange." There was a glint in her eyes as she talked about him. "Yeah, I remember he wears a bright orange jumpsuit. I talked him into some new clothes." "How long have you two been together?" She knew this was coming. "A year now," she lied. "I wanted to tell people, but Naruto figured it would be best to keep it secret." Ojiro narrowed his eyes. "Why? Is he ashamed to be dating my daughter?" No. It's not like that. It's just, you know how he's been treated around the village. He figured if people knew about us, then they would try to hurt me." Ojiro smiled. He didn't know this Naruto kid well enough to know for sure, but if he's that concerned with his daughter's well-being, then he sounded like a good guy. "So, when do I get to meet him?" It was a monumental day in fatherhood when you get the chance to scare the snot out of your daughter's boyfriend. "I can ask if he wants to come over tonight for dinner. Would that be okay?" Ojiro nodded before the brunette went out for the day. Break. "Naruto Uzumaki," Iruka called. The blonde stood and walked out of the classroom and into the private room they had set up for taking the test. The first thing he noticed after entering the room was a large fake smile courtesy of Mizuki. "Alright Naruto, this is your last exam for the day. We'll be asking you to perform the 3 jutsu we teach here. The henge, kawarimi and the bunshin. Any questions?" Mizuki smile seemed to taunt Naruto. "Yeah, does it have to be the standard bunshin?" "No. If you know another bunshin jutsu, then you may perform that," Iruka confirmed. Mizuki inwardly sneered, as if this demon knows another bunshin. Iruka sat down in a chair beside Mizuki behind a desk. "Alright, first up is the henge." Naruto nodded. "Henge," he exclaimed as he was enveloped in smoke. Once it dispersed, Iruka and Mizuki stared dumbly at a perfect copy of the 4th Hokage, Minato Namikaze. Mizuki sneered, "How can he do these with little to no trouble? If this keeps up, my plan is ruined." "Well done. Now I need you to summon at minimum 2 clones." Naruto dug his hands in his pockets, his blue chakra surged and for a moment became visible. "Kage Bunshin no Jutsu," he exclaimed as 3 perfect clones of Naruto appeared. Iruka was surprised. The Kage Bunshin was a Jonin-level skill. A mere academy student shouldn't know it, and let alone to do it without a hand sign. Mizuki wanted to throttle the so-called demon brat. After all his planning and tricks, Naruto passed, which means he had to resort to plan B to get him the forbidden scroll. Very good, Naruto-kun. Come get your headband and you may go for the rest of the day, Iruka said proudly as he watched his brother walk up and grab a headband before turning and walking away. Naruto walked out of the academy. Tomorrow would be his last time in the academy, when he came to be placed on a team. If everything went as history depicts, he should be placed on a team with Sasuke, Sakura, and Kakashi. He was not looking forward to that. Kakashi clearly showed favoritism to the Uchiha, whether it be because of some sort of debt he feels he owes Obito or the civilian council pressuring him to do it, he didn't know. Sasuke was arrogant and despite being privately trained by Kakashi still betrayed the leaf for the snake Sanin. Sakura was the worst part. She would hit him over the head all because Sasuke showed no interest in her. He kept walking until he saw a familiar set of buns. Tenten was running up to him with a bright smile on her face. Once she made it to him, she practically tackled him in a hug. He had no problem returning it and gently rubbed her back. I passed Ten-chan, he whispered into her ear. She broke the embrace much to Naruto's chagrin. That's great, Naruto-kun. As congratulations, I want you to come over for dinner tonight, she said with confidence. Naruto was nervous and it was painfully obvious. You don't have to be nervous, you've met my two-san before. Yeah, and last time he tried to kill me while screaming about how I deflowered his daughter. He wouldn't have killed you, probably. Yeah, well, it didn't help that you jumped my bone the second you thought we were alone, Naruto said flatly. Tenten giggled as he took her by the hand. They walked in the direction of the brunette's house. So, what's going to happen now? I mean, the first time around you stopped Mizuki Tem. Not to worry, Iruka-sensei will be enough to stop him, and if not, I may have accidentally slipped a note onto Gigi-chan's desk about his plan and the meeting place. Tenten smirked. You've really thought this through, she said as they walked up to the door of the weapons shop. Naruto had to suppress a nervous sigh as she opened the door and they walked in. Walking through the shop and up the stairs that led to the living area for her and her father, Naruto found him sitting there on the couch. He smiled to himself as he looked at the man he would one day call father. Hello, sir, Naruto said. Tenten eyed him. He was being stiff. Ojiro stood up from the couch and walked over toward the young couple. He smiled when he saw the glint in his daughter's eyes. No need for any of this sir stuff. My name's Ojiro. I am not some old man. He chuckled. Naruto lightly laughed along with the man. Tenten was glad that the blonde's nervousness was beginning to pass. Truthfully, her father was nothing but a big teddy bear. So Naruto-san, tell me about yourself. Ten-chan tells me you two have been together a year but didn't want to tell anyone to keep her safe. Naruto glanced at Tenten, who shrugged before he turned back to Ojiro. Yeah, I didn't think people would like me having a girlfriend, Naruto said, completely submitting to her story. Tenten beamed being called his girlfriend again, but couldn't help the annoyance that also filled her heart at not being called his wife. Let's see. Naruto trailed off while adopting a thinking pose. I like ramen, I like to learn new things like jutsu and cooking. I just passed my genin exam today, so I am excited to find out what team I'll be placed on. You only just graduated. Oh yeah, I am a year behind Ten-chan, but I have faith I'll catch up, Naruto exclaimed. Ojiro nodded. He had to admit he was worried that the blonde was too young, but if it's just a year, it's no big deal. Naruto sighed with relief when Ojiro got up saying the dinner was ready. Tenten smiled at her boyfriend and kissed him lightly on the cheek. Break. Naruto sighed when he woke the next morning in his old bed, in his old apartment, and not beside his wife in their lovely home. Soon, Naruto, soon. Today was the day of his team placements, and if all goes according to history, he should be placed with both Sakura and Sasuke. The thought of dealing with those two again caused him to shudder. The only solace was that once Sasuke tries to defect the village, Naruto can put an end to him. At that point, he would be a missing nin, or at least should be if the stupid civilian council keeps their noses out of it. After eating a full breakfast and tying his headband around his forearm, hour left for the academy. In his last life, he wore his headband tied around his head where it belonged. However, Tenten seemed to like his hair being let down. His hair was short and spiky and definitely not how he preferred it to be, but that can be fixed in time. He preferred for his hair to be a bit longer, like his father's. Entering the room, Naruto was greeted with the sight of both the pinkett and the platinum blonde fangirls arguing in front of the door. Again over something as trivial as Sasuke Uchiha. Get the hell out the way, Naruto growled, allowing a bit of Kyuubi's chakra to seep out of him. The girls turned wide-eyed to see who the voice belonged to, only to see it belonged to Naruto. Ino saw the deep scowl that played across her fellow blonde's face and decided to grant his request and get out of his way. Sakura, on the other hand, did not. What the hell, Naruto baka? Who do you think you're talking to? Sakura reared back for a punch. Ino's eyes widened. Was she really going to hit him? They were the ones in the wrong. They shouldn't have been arguing in the doorway, to begin with. She released a breath she didn't even know she was holding when, instead of taking the punch and being sent flying into the adjacent wall, Naruto caught the fist before jerking her sideways, effectively knocking her off her feet. She hit the ground with a thud. I am in no mood for your bullshit, Haruno-san. The venom in his words was practically palpable. The class stared wide-eyed at the so-called dead last. One thought bounced around the girls' minds. He didn't call me Sakura-chan. Alright everyone, that's enough. Everyone glanced from Naruto to the origin of the voice. Directly behind the blonde genin was Iruka Yumino. Naruto went and took a seat next to Shikamaru Nara as Sakura sat next to her Sasuke-kun. The blonde's Jinchuriki narrowed his eyes once he saw the Uchiha. His time will come. All Naruto had to do was bide his time. His future will not come to pass. Alright everyone, I would like to congratulate you all for graduating. From this day onward you are shinobi of Konohagakure. Be sure to represent the village well. Now on to team placements. Team 1, Naruto couldn't care enough to listen. All he needed was to be placed on a team with Sasuke. Considering the bastard was Rookie of the Year, it shouldn't be too hard to be placed with him. After all, Naruto was supposed to be the dead last. Team 7 will be Naruto Uzumaki, Sakura Haruno. A loud groan could be heard from both Naruto and Sakura. And Sasuke Uchiha. Sakura triumphantly raised both fists into the air while yelling something about true love. Naruto sighed. He hated that history was repeating itself. Your Jonin sensei will be Kakashi Hatake. Iruka read through the other two teams that made up the Rookie 9. They mattered very little in the grand scheme of things. Sure, they each played a role in his life, but neither of them played a role in creating the future Naruto was determined to prevent. Waiting for their sensei was just as boring as the young Uzumaki remembered 2 hours, 2 whole hours of Sakura trying to get Sasuke's attention. Luckily, Naruto decided it best to sit at the far side of the room, away from the two. The door slid open and a head entered the room. The silver-haired Jonin Kakashi Hatake stood looking at his new team. Sasuke was currently glaring at Kakashi for being late and wasting the Uchiha's valuable time, while Sakura was screaming about how he was late and how unprofessional it was. Surprisingly to him, the one not saying for doing anything was Konoha's resident hyperactive knucklehead ninja Naruto Uzumaki. Kakashi stared at the blonde. He's starting to look like his father. You're late. My first opinion. I don't much like you, Kakashi said flatly as he rubbed the back of his neck. Meet me on the roof, he said before disappearing into smoke. Sakura sighed before turning towards Sasuke. Let's go, Sasuke-kun. Sakura turned to Naruto to find where he was sitting was no vacant. Where did he go? When Kakashi reappeared on the roof of the academy, started hearing footsteps. It couldn't be his team, could it? He leaned over the edge and was surprised to see the blonde-haired loudmouth of his team walking up the wall of the building. So I see you already know wall walking. Naruto climbed over the side of the wall and sat down on one of the steps. Yeah, Gigi-chan gave me some scrolls to help me with basics, which wasn't completely a lie. The forbidden scroll had much information in it, but the Hokage didn't necessarily give it to him. Kakashi nodded in understanding before the other two finally made their way to the roof. Dobi, how did you get up here? The window. Alright, you three, Kakashi said, interrupting Sasuke as he was about to say more. Let's start with introductions. Ya know to learn about each other. How about you go first, sensei, just to show us how it goes, Sakura said meekly. Well, alright. My name's Kakashi Hatake, I don't particularly like much or dislike things. My hobbies are, too old for you three, and my dream is. I don't have one, see easy. You first, Pinky. My name is Sakura Haruno, my likes are, looks at Sasuke and giggles. My hobbies are, glances at Sasuke, as for my dream, still looking at Sasuke. And I hate Ino Pig and Naruto Baka. Kakashi sweat dropped. Great, a fangirl. You next, Mr. Whiskers. Naruto glared at Kakashi for the Mr. Whiskers remark. My name is Naruto Uzumaki. My likes are Ojiro 2-san, Ten-chan, training and learning new things. My dislikes are people that hate a person without even knowing the person. I also dislike fangirls, arrogant people, and people who don't take things seriously. My hobbies are spending time with Ten-chan and training, and my dream is to become Hokage. Sakura and Sasuke arched their collective eyebrows when Naruto mentioned Ojiro and Tenten. Kakashi almost looked surprised. Tenten. Isn't she on Guy's team? How does he know her? You next, Broody. My name is Sasuke Uchiha. I don't particularly like anything and I dislike a lot of things. My dream isn't a dream but more like an ambition because I will make it a reality. I will kill a certain someone. The blonde and silver-headed ninja sweat dropped. Sasuke-kun's so cool, Sakura thought to herself as she stared longingly at her crush. Naruto felt sick. He hates how consumed the boy was with hate. Alright. You're all different. I want you three to meet me at Training Ground 7 at 6 a.m. sharp, Kakashi said before turning around. Oh, and you might not want to eat anything for breakfast. Tomorrow will be your real genin exam. Wait, sensei, what do you mean? We already passed the genin exam. Oh, that was only to weed out the weak. Tomorrow your real test starts. It has a 66% fail rate, so get some rest, Kakashi said before disappearing in a puff of smoke. So, Sasuke-kun. Here it comes, Naruto thought. He looked at her through narrowed eyes, trying to give her some sort of hint, but alas, it had no effect. Do you want to go do something later? No. Sasuke shot her down without a moment's hesitation. Even Naruto felt bad for the pinkett. Sakura's demeanor changed and she became quiet. Sasuke left towards the Uchiha compound. Naruto sighed, having decided to try and help her. Perhaps this will do it. Perhaps if Sasuke had someone left in the village he wouldn't betray them. Look, Sakura-san, Naruto begrudgingly said. Sakura turned towards the boy, angry at first. She figures he would try and ask her out like he always did after Sasuke turned her down. However, her anger subsided when she realized that he didn't call her Sakura-chan. Sasuke-tem will never date you as you are. He prefers strong women. You may not want to hear this, but you don't really take your training seriously. What do you suggest I do? I love him, but when I train too hard I pass out. Naruto turned to the pinkett and placed a hand on her shoulder. I suggest you stop dieting. The reason you pass out during training is that you burning calorie that you don't have. So if I stop dieting, Sasuke will look at me, Sakura asked with pleading eyes. I am not saying that, I am saying it will help. Sakura nodded. She would consider his words. Say, Naruto-san. The blonde in question turned and looked at her. Why are you helping me? I thought you liked me. Simple, Sakura-san. I moved on. I found the love of my life and I couldn't be happier. He smiled before turning around and disappearing into a swirl of leaves. Sakura stared dumbfounded at the spot of leaves where Naruto had just been. The advice about Sasuke was sound. It would even save her life on C rank and above missions, but what was this about him finding his true love? She felt a small pang in her heart. She had always thought Naruto would pine after her affections, but now, to hear he moved on didn't quite sit right with her. Naruto arrived late to his team meeting the next day, or at least late as far as his teammates were concerned. He was still early as far as their sensei was concerned. He wasn't even there, and if the blonde remembered right, wouldn't be for another 15 minutes. Sakura looked annoyed by the tardiness of her sensei. Once Naruto arrived, he got an earful. "You're late." "Yeah," Naruto answered in an almost bored tone. "You'll learn Kakashi sensei's late a lot." Sakura sighed in defeat. Sasuke grunted in annoyance. "Well, I am glad to see you all made it." The trio turned and saw Kakashi standing behind Naruto. The blonde seethed inwardly. It wasn't that he hated the Jonin, but he didn't particularly like how he acted, especially toward the Uchiha. "Alright, you three today will be doing your real genin exam," Kakashi started as he pulled 2 silver bells from his kunai pouch. "In this test, you'll have to get one of these bells. In order to get a bell, however, you have to come at me with the intent to kill." "But sensei, there are only 2 bells but 3 of us," Sakura questioned. "That's right, which means the one who doesn't get a bell will be sent back to the academy." Sakura gulped while Sasuke and Naruto just looked bored. "Begin," he said before the 3 genins jumped into the trees. Naruto cursed his luck. If he wanted to pass, he would either have to trick Sasuke somehow into working with him or get tied to a stump again. Convincing Sakura wouldn't be impossible. She seemed to take his advice about dieting, but Sasuke was more likely to try and kill him. Naruto sighed as he walked up to Sakura, pissed. "Sakura-san," the pink kid in question jumped slightly before turning around. "Don't sneak up on me," she hissed. "What do you want?" "Help." Sakura was taken aback. Here was Konoha's most hyperactive knucklehead asking for help. Had she died and traveled into an alternate dimension or something? "Why would you want my help?" "Think about it, Sakura-san, we're freshly graduates genins. We don't stand a chance against Kakashi-sensei. There's no way one of us can take on a jonin." Sakura nodded. "Yeah, you have a point. That's why I've been thinking. There has to be another reason behind this. I think he wants us to work together." Sakura scowled. "Naruto Baka, there are only 2 bells. If we work together, Sasuke-kun will be sent back to the academy." "I don't think so. If we can convince him to work with us, then there shouldn't be any penalty." "But what if you're wrong?" Naruto's eyebrow twitched. He sighed. "If I am wrong, then I'll give you and Sasuke-tem the bells." Sakura nodded as the duo made their way in the direction Sasuke jumped off to. As they walked for what seemed like hours, Naruto's eyes narrowed. Years of training had made him pretty good at detecting genjutsu. Sure, he may not have the talent to perform them due to his insanely high chakra reserves, but he knew when he was trapped in one. He had to be when fighting an Uchiha. Despite being amongst the smartest kunoichi in their class, Sakura still hadn't noticed that they had passed the same tree 3 times. Sakura, Naru, too. Sakura stopped in her tracks before turning around so fast it surprised Naruto she hadn't given herself whiplash. The blonde sighed before turning around himself. What he saw was Sasuke laying on the ground, bloodied and covered in kunai. Help me." Sasuke managed to get out. His voice sounded pained. Sakura ran up to him while screaming his name. She bent down and sobbed into his bloodied back. "Sakura-san. Sakura-san, calm down, it's just a genjutsu," Naruto said as he shook her before forming the ram seal and dispelling the Sasuke illusion. Up in a tree, Kakashi smiled underneath his mask. "Come on, we still need to find the tem," Naruto said as he pulled his pink-haired teammate to her feet. She nodded and the duo ran forward in hopes of finding the Uchiha. "Sasuke-kun," Sakura exclaimed before running up to him and throwing herself onto him in a passionate hug. Sasuke looked up with irritation in his eyes. Naruto took a glimpse at what Sasuke was doing, and if he wasn't mistaken, then the Uchiha seemed to be making a rough sketch of a battle plan. "Sakura, get off." Naruto winced at the ravenette's volume and pulled Sakura off him by the back of her collar. Sasuke stood and glared at the two dead wheats as he called them. What the hell do you two want? Can't you see I am busy? We need you, Naruto stated, which got both Sakura and Sasuke's attention. We believe we figured out the real meaning behind this test. Real meaning? What are you talking about? You couldn't figure your way out of a wet paper bag. This insult angered Naruto. He could feel Kurama inside his cage wriggling around. Look, neither of us can go up against Kakashi-sensei. We're freshly graduated genin against a jonin. Our best chance against him is to work together. To Naruto's surprise, Sasuke seemed to ponder this for a moment before the familiar Uchiha arrogance took over for rational thought. I don't need you. I am an Uchiha, an elite, while you're just a no-named idiot with no clan, he spat before turning to Sakura, and you're just a talentless fangirl from a civilian family. Sasuke Tem, we need. No, I am going to get those bells by myself and show you the difference between you and me, Sasuke said before turning and storming off. Naruto sighed. Why Kami, why was it so hard for the Uchiha to understand that you can't go it alone? Even with the almighty Sharingan, he was blind. So, what about you, Sakura-san? Naruto stated. Sasuke Tem's not going to work with us, so what will you do? Sakura looked from Naruto to the direction her beloved Sasuke walked off to. She turned back to the blonde. I think you're right, I mean Naruto-san. We can't take Kakashi-sensei alone, he's too powerful. For the second time in 5 minutes, he was speechless. He had believed she would scoff at him and tell him off, but instead, she accepted the fact she couldn't do it alone and accepted his help. Naruto smiled. Thanks for not blowing me off. I truly believe that teamwork is what's best here. Kakashi stood in the center of the clearing reading the latest issue of Ika Ika Paradise. He was just getting to the good part where the main character Imagi and his student hubby had just finished their interrogation of the latest criminal that was brought in. Hubby had been shooting her sensei, secret lover lustful looks all chapter, and on their way from the interrogation room, she tackled Imagi with a passionate kiss before dragging him into a broom closet. It annoyed Kakashi to no end that he was interrupted when Sasuke jumped out of a bush and attacked him. The Uchiha went for a lower body jab which was easily countered before he leapt and kicked downward. His left was blocked by Kakashi's arm. Sasuke made a tisk noise punching at the Jonin's right side. Kakashi blocked it with his right hand. Though this attack was just to distract the Jonin, as Sasuke's other hand went for the bells. In the bushes, Sakura's eyes bulged as Sasuke's finger tipped the bell before he was pushed off of Kakashi. Damn, this kid's good. Sasuke turned his body in midair and started to weave through a few hand signs. Kakashi's eyes widened. Genin shouldn't be able to use fire-style jutsu, it takes way too much chakra. Fire-style. Fireball jutsu, Sasuke muttered as he blew a giant fireball from his mouth. It engulfed the area around Kakashi. Sasuke smirked as he landed. No way he got out of that. Once the fire dispersed, Sasuke's smirk disappeared when he saw the Jonin was in fact missing. Sasuke took a step forward, which proved to be a mistake as he was then pulled into the earth under him. Earth style. Headhunter jutsu, the voice of Kakashi said from behind him. Sasuke seethed with anger. How could he, an elite, be defeated by anyone? Kakashi was standing alone in a clearing reading the latest issue of ICHA and giggling like a schoolgirl when he felt the presence of his most knuckle-headed genin. Peering over the book, the Jonin eyed Naruto with annoyance. He had just gotten to the best part of the story too. You know, a head-on attack like this won't work on me, the Jonin said as he dog-eared his page and placed the book back into his kunai pouch. Naruto didn't say anything, instead opted to attack, pushing off with his right foot. The blonde sped towards the Jonin. Kakashi was surprised that the so-called dead last was so fast. Naruto went for an abdominal punch, but Kakashi sidestepped it. The blonde leapt into the air and attacked with a knee, but Kakashi blocked it with a hand. The blonde channeled some chakra into the knee and stuck to the Jonin's hand. Kakashi was impressed that the boy knew how to channel chakra so well. Is this really the dead last? Using the momentum from his attack, Naruto used his knee as a pivot and sent a roundhouse kick at the man's head but was blocked by his other arm. Naruto smirked as he stuck to the other arm. His body fell down and his hand tipped the bells before Kakashi leapt backward. Damn, he almost had me. Naruto cursed under his breath before vanishing and reappearing in front of Kakashi. The Jonin's eyes widened in shock. How did he? That question would be better asked later when he wasn't in range of Naruto's taijutsu. The blonde sent a palm strike into Kakashi's chest. The Jonin retreated backward. The Jinchuriki smirked. Kakashi had fallen right into his trap, for he leapt right into the waiting arms of Sakura. The pinkett reached towards the bells and beep beep. No. Kakashi turned and was surprised to see Sakura in the motion to swipe the bells. How did I not sense her? Kakashi eyed the duo suspiciously. Something clearly wasn't right with Naruto. Every document in the boy's file said he was a loud-mouthed brat who couldn't even perform a simple clone jutsu, but this Naruto is different. He seemed calm, relaxed and calculated. Sure, his file said the boy tended to hide behind his emotions, but this is too much. But sensei, Sakura exclaimed but was interrupted when Kakashi held up a hand. But since Naruto and Sakura seemed to have gotten it, I'll give you a second chance. What do you mean they get it? How could the Banshee and the dead last get anything? Sasuke said. The arrogance in his voice was almost palpable. Sakura visible shrunk as he crushes insulted her. Well, Sasuke, I'll tell you, Kakashi stated. You see, the true purpose of this test was teamwork, something Naruto understood. You see, as a team you will be expected to work together, because if you don't have teamwork on a mission, you're going to die. Sasuke scoffed while Sakura silently thanked Naruto for bringing up the concept of teamwork. The blonde, on the other hand, was silently cursing himself for getting carried away and using the Hiraishin. He wasn't supposed to know that jutsu until after the war. It was even worse since him being Minato's son was not common knowledge yet. Kakashi eyed the blonde with suspicion, not only because he did not act as the reports said but because of the jutsu he used. The Jonin decided it would be better to get the boy alone and have a meeting with the Hokage. A few moments passed and the blonde and pinkett were not happy. Why are we being tied to a pole? Naruto mused. Sakura nodded in agreement. Kakashi merely ignored them and walked over towards a black stone. Do you all see this? This is a memorial stone for ninja who died in battle. Heroes, the lot of them. On this stone are the names of more than one of my friends, one of them my best friend, Kakashi said while staring down at the name. Naruto looked over towards the man, his eyes filled with sadness. He used to say that a ninja that abandons a mission is scum, but a ninja who abandons their comrades are worse than scum. You ask why you're being tied up. Well, it's because you asked Sasuke for help, but after one failure you gave up. Quote. So Sasuke and I will be eating these 2 lunches in front of you as punishment. Sakura groaned as she saw the Avenger start to dig into the bento. Naruto had an everlasting confused expression on his face. This didn't happen before. Sasuke, Kakashi said, which got the Uchiha's attention. I have important business to attend to, so you can have my bento, but do not feed them. He pointed to Sakura and Naruto before vanishing in a swirl of leaves. Sasuke shrugged and continued to eat. If Kakashi didn't want to eat, that's fine by him. It only means when the second chance rolls around that he'll be more unprepared. Sasuke lowered his chopsticks as he heard the stomach of Sakura growl. He glanced between her and the second bento. If he let his teammates go hungry and eat the second box, then he would have double the energy when they have their second chance. But then on the other hand, if he didn't share the second box, his teammates would only slow him down. Not to mention that Kakashi had just finished talking about how the test was about teamwork. The Uchiha swallowed the rice in his mouth before moving on to the second box. He opened it and sighed, knowing what he was about to do could possibly keep him from passing if he would be wrong. Here, Sasuke said. If you two don't eat, you'll only slow me down. Sakura had stars in her eyes as she believed that this gesture was Sasuke finally falling for her. Naruto's sweat dropped as he heard what the Ravenet said. Sure, he's doing this for himself, but it would greatly benefit the team. Sasuke. The three paused and looked back. Kakashi stood there with what could only be described as a one-eye scowl. What do I tell you? Not to feed them. And why are you feeding them? Sasuke scowled and stood up. You said that we are a team. If I didn't feed them, they would only be a hindrance. That's right, Sakura exclaimed. We are one. Naruto chuckled lightly as he smirked smugly at their sensei. You are one, huh? The three nodded. Well then, I only have one thing to say to that: you pass. If she wasn't tied to a post, Sakura would have crumpled to the ground. If the look on her face was any indication, Sasuke breathed a sigh of relief he didn't even know he was holding. Meet back here tomorrow morning at 8, Kakashi stated as he went to untie Sakura. Naruto eyed the Jonin. You two are free to go. Naruto, a word if you please. Sasuke rolled his eyes and walked into the direction of the Uchiha compound. Sakura shot a worried glance toward the blonde but walked off after receiving a nod from Naruto. He eyed the man as he went to untie him. He cursed himself for exposing himself as he had. You wanna tell me how you could use the Hiraishin? Naruto sighed and placed a hand on the back of his neck. Yup, got carried away. Sure, but can we go to the Hokage Tower? I don't want to explain this twice, Naruto said, expertly avoiding the topic. He needed time to come up with something, anything that could be believable. The two walked through the streets of Konoha together. Naruto ignored the looks he received from everyone, but Kakashi seemed to snarl at the civilians. With a heavy sigh, Hiruzen Sarutobi, the third Hokage, stamped the last of his paperwork for the day. It was hard enough keeping Naruto safe and keeping the council off his back long enough for him to graduate, but adding the bane of every Kage's existence to the mix was just torture. Why did Kami hate him? Just when he thought he was done with the nightmare, his successor Minato Namikaze up and dies. Which left the position open, which if left unfixed then the other nations would see it as a sign of weakness and attack them. Which left them with two options, one being Hiruzen to retake the position and two being that Danzo, Hiruzen's friend and rival, take the position. There was no way that was going to happen. Danzo was an old warhawk who believed that the best way to peace was to crush your enemies. That's why he created his organization called the Root. He trained them to be emotionless warriors that would infiltrate enemy villages and feed information back to him. Hiruzen suspected that the organization was still up and running even though the elderly Kage ordered the Warhawk to shut it down years ago. Hiruzen sighed again as he placed the paper onto the neatly stacked pile of that was his finished paperwork. Suddenly there was a gust of wind and a swirl of leaves that swept up the papers and spread them around the room. Hiruzen wanted to cry. Hokage-sama. The old man turned to see his surrogate grandson and his new sensei standing before him. What is it, Kakashi? The meeting to discuss team placement isn't for another hour. My apologies, Hokage-sama, but I have questions that very much need answers. What kinda questions? I can answer that, Gigi, Naruto chirped as he walked over to the Hokage's desk. During my team's final teat, I kinda got carried away and did something I shouldn't have. Hiruzen sat up. He was slightly scared. If this was important enough for them to bring it to his attention, then it has to have something to do with the fox. What did you do? He used a jutsu that no one should know, the Hiraishin. The Kage stared shocked at Kakashi. The old man's eyes drifted to Naruto, who adopted a sheepish expression. Naruto-kun, how is it that you used that jutsu? Hiruzen asked. Naruto gulped. Here it is, make or break time. Kami, how Naruto wished Kurama would wake up and speak. He was always better at coming up with lies. I kinda learned it from. That's when a light bulb went off in the blonde's head. I learned it from Tu-san. This earned the boy shocked expressions. How do you? Naruto adopted his sheepish expression again and started poking his index fingers together. Well, you remember my 9th birthday? Hiruzen nodded. Naruto had to hide the shudder that went up his spine. It was a memory he remembered well and something he tried so very hard to forget. Kakashi and Hiruzen shuddered along with the boy, remember. How could they not? It was possibly the worst thing to ever happen to the boy. It had been his birthday and the villagers were participating in one of their favorite pastimes, the annual fox hunt. He had run as fast as his little legs could carry him, but it was no use when a chunin from the mob had thrown a kunai with deadly accuracy and struck a young Naruto in the right thigh. The blonde screamed in pain as he fell. B tried to get back up to run, but the mob was already on top of him. Most of that night, up until the main event, was lost to him because of time and many head trauma, but he recalled the main event. They had dragged a bloodied and beaten Naruto through the streets for the rest of the village adults to see. He had expected someone to step in and save him, but alas, no one came. They lifted him up and he felt a sharp agonizing pain in each hand. He looked up through swollen eyes to see both hands nailed to each side of a wooden cross. Looking down, he could see what looked like straw and villagers dumping some liquid onto it. Naruto recognized the scent of the liquid. It was gasoline. They wanted to crucify him. He felt a hand forcefully grab at his spiky blonde hair and lift his head up, so he was face to face with a man with violet eyes. The man smiled a savage smile as he held up a lit match. "This is for my Ni-san, you damn demon." The man shouted him Naruto's face. He spits on him and drops the match. Naruto watched as the flames started to grow, started to rise higher and higher until the tips of the inferno began to lick at the bottoms of his feet. At first, the pain was manageable. The real pain came when the flames started to lick at his legs. He screamed louder than he had ever screamed before as he could feel the skin on his legs begin to bubble and pop. He must have blacked out for a time before waking up long enough to see a silver-haired man carrying him bridal style as he rushed towards the hospital. Needless to say, it hadn't been one of his fondest memories. "While I was unconscious, I kinda woke up in my mindscape." This earned an arched eyebrow from both the Jonin and Hokage. "It's like a world crafted by my imagination. Anyway, I woke up in what seemed like a sewer and in front of me was the fox's cage. He talked with me, and when I learned the real reason for him attacking the village, I went to write the paper seal of the cage." Kakashi seemed shocked that the young blonde seemed so willing to sacrifice his own life to free the demon. He was about to say something before Hiruzen spoke first. "What possessed you to try and free the beast that destroyed the village and killed your parents?" Naruto adopted a thinking pose. "Well, I hated this village." This seemed to shock the Hokage and Jonin. Hiruzen leaned back into his chair, "And after hearing Kurama's story, I learned he was just as much a victim as I was." "Who's Kurama?" Kakashi asked with a raised eyebrow. Naruto made an "oh" face. "That's the Kyuubi's real name. He's actually a lot nicer than you would think." Hiruzen sighed. "Well, what did Kurama say to you?" "He said that he never meant to attack the village," Naruto exclaimed, gaining skeptical looks from both adults. "He was ripped out of Ka-san after I was born. Neither he or Tu-san knows who it was, but it was an Uchiha who wore a mask. He used his Sharingan to control him. After hearing that, I went to undo the seal. After all, it wasn't fair that he was sealed away for something that wasn't even his fault. That's when Tu-san appeared to me. Apparently he sealed what was left of his chakra into the seal as a fail-safe." Hiruzen smirked and nodded. It was definitely something Minato would do. He always seemed to think of everything. "Very well, I accept this answer," the aged Hokage said. "What other things have Minato-kun taught you?" Naruto trudged through the streets of Konoha. He was mentally exhausted from having to come up with so many lies on the spot. How did Tenten do it? Mentally he was exhausted. Kurama was better at lying than he was. If only he could contact the fox, but something was keeping him from entering his mindscape. Walking up to his apartment door, he noticed the door was unlocked, thankfully undamaged, but it certainly was not unlocked when he left this morning. Cautiously the blonde pulled out a kunai and slowly opened the door. The first thing he noticed was the lack of clutter on his floor. Sure, he cleaned up the mess when he gained his future knowledge, but he hadn't made it spotless. Now it was practically spotless. Moving through the apartment, the smell of something sweet caught his senses. Turning the corner into the kitchen, he struck a fighting pose before seeing Tenten standing in his kitchen with a tray of freshly baked brownies. Where were you when I actually needed a knife? Ten-chan, what are you doing here? Naruto stated. Tenten held back a chuckle, he was too cute when he was confused. What? Can I not welcome my loving husband home after a long day of training? She stated while placing both hands on her hip and cocking them to the left. It's not like that, I was wondering how you got in. Remember, you told me where you keep your spare key. Naruto arched an eyebrow. The location of his spare house key was a secret that many didn't know about. Right on the front of his apartment door he had carved a small nook underneath the plaque that said his room number, 435. It was not bigger than a key. He had told Tenten when they started dating where he kept the spare. Naruto sighed before collapsing onto the sofa. It smells like lavender. Ten-chan, did you clean all this by yourself? The girl rubbed the back of her head. Kinda, I used a clone to help me. I've seen you do it more than enough times. Naruto chuckled from his place on the sofa. Tenten walked over and sat next to her husband. So why did you come over anyway? Ten-chan? Can't have been to clean my home. She giggled lightly and leaned against his shoulder. Well, I figured that we could live together again, as a married couple should. What about Ojiro-san? To this, she just shook her head. Tu-san was upset at first, but after promising to visit every day he allowed it, under one condition: no grandchildren yet. Naruto could feel his face grow pale. He chuckled. The man was exactly the same as he was when he was older, well, except for appearance. He always did try to keep the two from having kids. For what reason Naruto will never know. When asked, Ojiro always answered, a grandfather's an old man, I don't feel old. Ojiro would be Ojiro no matter what time period they were in. Tenten was many things: smart, beautiful, fierce when needed, and kind when the situation called for it, but above all, she was a wife and she took her role as a wife seriously, some would say more serious than anything. But who could blame her for being a supportive wife? She was after all married to the most wonderful man in all the elemental nations, or at least he was when it came to her. Sure, Naruto had his faults, but everyone does, like how he would leave the toilet seat up when they lived together in the house they would one day own, or how he always put others first even if it hurt him in some way. She lay in the bed she and her husband had shared the night previous, and much to her chagrin nothing untoward happened. Sure, they cuddled, but that wasn't the only thing she wanted. She was his wife. In the future they hadn't been lucky enough to have a child before everything went to hell, but now they could change that. But he was against them starting their family so early. Yeah, she understood why, but it made her slightly angry. She rolled under the covers to look at the man she had just slept next to, only to frown with worry. Naruto didn't look like he was sleeping well. In fact, it looked as if he was having some nightmare. She snuggled closer to him, buried her face into his exposed chest. She understood why he was having a nightmare all too well. She had her fair share since she got back. Having to watch the love of her life die over and over again was terrifying. She could only imagine how much more petrifying it was for him, considering he was the one who died. Naruto-kun, she said as she squeezed in tight enough to rousing the boy from his slumber, to which he was thankful. He looked down at her through drowsy eyes as she snuggled into him. He smiled and placed a kiss on top of her head. She looked up at him and smiled. It's okay, Haim. Just a dream, he whispered as he placed an arm around her supportively. As she placed a hand on his chest, she smiled as she felt the telltale sensation of his pectorals. Naruto's body was beginning to resemble his future self a bit with each day that passed, thanks to the extra training he's been putting himself through to get his body in top physical condition. So what's the plan for today? Naruto hummed for a moment as he thought on his plans for the day. More D-rank missions. I am starting to remember why I hated those. Tenten chuckled at her husband's misfortune. She and her team have long since stopped having to do the chores. The villagers felt they were too good to do themselves. Alright, love. Time to get up, Naruto said as he shifted his weight to get out of bed. Though Tenten wasn't having this, as she channeled chakra into the lower half of her body that was still sitting in bed to cling to it. She wanted to spend as much time with him as possible this morning and wasn't about to let him go. He was a wonderful source of heat. Come on, Haim, I have missions in 3 hours. I don't care. Naruto sighed and moved to lay back down. Tenten smiled because this was another argument she won. He smiled down at her and started to run his hand through her long brown hair that was uncontained by her hair bands. She loved the feeling of having him play with her hair. Naruto frowned slightly as he remembered their purpose for being in this time. While it was nice to spend these mornings together, it still didn't stop him from worrying. I don't know what to do, Ten-chan. This got her attention as she lifted her head from his chest. She looked at him with confusion. This whole mess with the Uchiha, I don't know what to do. Tenten rolled her eyes, had swung herself out of bed. Well, that ruined the mood, she muttered. What do you mean? She narrowed her eyes at the man before her. Naruto-kun, can't we just have a nice morning together without worrying about the mission? She pouted. Was it too much to ask that she come first to him? Yeah, the mission to stop Sasuke from leaving was important, but it wasn't the most important thing, or at least it wasn't in her mind. It boggled Naruto's mind that she could say that. He would love nothing more than to spend a quiet morning with her and do things a husband and wife should, but they didn't have that luxury of time to waste time with the mundane. He sighed. Ten-chan, as much as I want to give you my undivided attention, unfortunately, we don't have that option. I leave for Wave tomorrow, then comes the Chunin exams, and I am still not convinced Sasuke Tem will willingly stay. She nodded. I understand that, but it's like the mission's all you think about. Can't today just be about us? She said as she threw on a shit. Naruto hung his head. Perhaps he had let the mission consume more of his time than he should have. At this rate, it would become a detriment to their relationship. He sighed. You're right. Tenten smirked and muttered that she was always right. Naruto decided to ignore it. I let this mission overshadow what matters. There was a pregnant pause before he continued. I am just scared is all. Scared? Naruto-kun, you're doing all you can do. If that's not enough, then he'll need to be killed. I agree, but what Hokage will I be if I don't give it my best shot? She was starting to get annoyed. She knew she shouldn't because it was a very real concern, but they still had a month and a half to figure things out. Granted, that's not much time in the grand scheme of things, but there was no need to rush. The Hokage isn't perfect, you idiot. She hated calling him that, even if he acted like it sometimes. Kakashi-san was a pervert. Tsunade-san was an alcoholic with a gambling problem. Minato-san lost not one but two of his genin. Sarutobi-sama gave too much power to the council. Tobirama-sama was emotionless, and I am sure Hashirama-sama had more than his fair share of faults. Naruto had to give it to her. No Hokage was perfect. Yeah, you're right. You're always right, Naruto admitted. Just because he was strong didn't mean he could save everyone. Tenten smirked triumphantly. Don't you ever get tired of being right? Nope, she chirped as she took a seat on the bed next to Naruto. She leaned her head onto his shoulder. Besides, you're cute when you pout. Naruto rolled his eyes. I am still going to give it my best shot. I won't have people saying I gave up. Tenten huffed lightly and lightly smacked his chest. No one says you should give up. I am just saying you don't have to be all business all the time. I have needs, Naruto-kun, and one of those is my husband. Naruto nodded and kissed her lightly on the forehead. Naruto stood up from the bed, much to his wife's chagrin, and went over to the closet and started pulling out clothes. Tenten watched as he dressed in a pair of black Anbu pants and a navy blue shirt with an orange Anbu caption tattoo emblazoned on his chest in orange. She chuckled slightly. Some things will never change, one being Naruto's love for his friends and two his favorite color being orange. What are you getting dressed for? She asked. Naruto's head popped out from the neck hole of the shirt and he turned back to his beloved. As much as I would love to spend the rest of the day in bed worshipping you like the goddess you are, I have my daily missions. Tenten pouted as she knew she could not convince him to stay in bed with her. Naruto noticed this. Come on, Ten-chan, no need to pout. Look, after I get home we'll go on a date. Break. Naruto scowled as he plucked another weed from the garden of a rather pudgy woman from the civilian council. He hated D-ranked missions. They were little more than chores that the people of Konoha were too lazy to do themselves. His thoughts on the lowest rank of missions the village had to offer hadn't changed since his younger years, even after becoming Hokage. The first time around, due to his lack of knowledge on gardening and plants, in general, caused him to mistakenly pluck not just weeds but also plants that could have bore fruit. Not even being the son of the fourth Hokage could save him from having to replant new vegetable seeds as punishment for destroying the pudgy woman's garden. Now, however, was different. He knew what not to do thanks to his future friendship with Ino Yamanaka. He winced as he felt the telltale pain of a blister forming on his palm. He sighed and cursed under his breath. He hated that feeling of having soft skin again. It was almost depressing how weak he was now compared to how he once was. In the future, time travel is confusing. He wasn't the 26-year-old Hokage that he was. Now he's a 13-year-old genin again with poor chakra control and less than developed muscle mass. One thing was for sure: he would have to train long and hard later on in the day. The only thing that pulling weeds is good for was slowly increasing his physical strength. Luckily, even though his body is that of a 13-year-old boy, his mind is that of a 26-year-old man. Channeling a bit of chakra to his hand, Naruto smiled as he felt the soft pain in his hands subside as the chakra protected his hand. There was another thing about being 13 again. His control was completely shot, which meant no advanced Rasengans, no Sage Mode, no elemental manipulation. Hell, he couldn't even perform the summoning jutsu because he hadn't yet signed the Toad summoning contract. Looking over, he saw that his fellow genin, Sasuke and Sakura, were not faring much better. It was slight, but Naruto could see the fatigue and pain pass over the Uchiha's face. The blonde smiled slightly as he noticed the boy's discomfort. The pinkett would rip her hand away from the weeds every once in a while and shake her hand violently. Obviously, the pain of the blisters was getting to her. The blonde sighed as he looked at the girl with concern. Sure, he would never have the relationship he had once had with the pinkett, but he would be lying if he said that the two of them hadn't somehow become friends after all the sparring and training they've done together. Since she had started taking her training more serious, he felt it necessary, since it was his idea for keeping Sasuke in the village, that he would oversee her training personally. Sakura wiped her forehead and glanced over to her teammates and sighed. Naruto and Sasuke had piles of weeds that could be compared to small dogs, while her own was the size of a coffee mug. Naruto saw the look on his friend's face. "Cheer up, Sakura-san," Naruto said as he scooted closer to her and patted her on the shoulder. He leaned in and whispered to her, "Apply a little chakra to your palms, it'll ease the pain and strengthen the skin." The pinkett glanced up at him and nodded. Doing as instructed, she channeled her chakra into her hands and surprisingly could feel the pain in them ease. She smiled. "Thanks, Naruto-san." Sasuke arched an eyebrow at the two before huffing and going back to work. Naruto sighed. That was part of history that hadn't changed. Sasuke was still an antisocial prick. If things kept up the way they are, then eventually the Ravenet will defect to join Orochimaru and eventually come to destroy Konoha. The blonde shook his head. He couldn't let that happen. Not again. He was the Hokage, and as Hokage, he vowed to do anything in his power to protect his village and its citizens. If worse comes to worse, he'll be forced to kill the Uchiha before he manages to escape after the Valley of the End. Hours passed and the genin of Team 7 finally finished their weeding mission, and the three were staring daggers into the backside of their sensei Kakashi Hatake. "I want to thank you again, Kakashi-san. If it wasn't for you, that garden would never have been weeded. My back hasn't been in the best of shape these days," the woman said as she paid the Hokage for a successful mission. "It was our pleasure, ma'am," the silver-haired Jonin said with an eye smile. The three genins glared hatred into the Jonin's back. "You didn't do anything, it was all us," was the collective thought of the trio. Walking out of the Hokage Tower, everyone was quiet until Kakashi broke it. "Alright, you three are free for the rest of the day. Make sure to get some rest because we start again at 8 o'clock tomorrow," Kakashi said. Sakura sighed in relief as she was sore all over from the manual labor that they had done today. Naruto was thankful because he had time to shower and change before his date with Tenten and Sasuke, because Well, because he thought he had better things to do than to pick weeds from some old lady's garden. Sakura glanced at her companion and smiled softly as she thought of the blonde as somewhat of a friend, even though their history would suggest differently. She looked away with eyes filled with sadness as she thought of all the times she had hit or yelled at the young boy beside her. Naruto-san. The young Jinchuriki glanced toward the pinkett. Yes, Sakura-san. He arched an eyebrow as he saw the girl seem to fidget nervously in place. Since they had started training together, Sakura had changed her appearance somewhat. She had kept her hair as long as it had always been, but now wore a one-piece dress was, now a two-piece top and skirt outfit with fishnet shirt underneath and a black belt holding up her skirt. I am sorry. This caught Naruto by surprise. To his knowledge, she hadn't done anything to offend him in any way. Sakura saw the confusion on his face. I am sorry for always yelling at you and hitting you. Naruto made an face before turning back to Sakura. Despite their future problems, he had started to care for the younger version of the girl. Well, thanks. He rubbed the back of his head. Do you want to? I don't know, train or something. Naruto-kun, how do you still have so much energy? I am exhausted. Naruto's mind stopped as he heard her refer to him as kun. He smiled slightly. Perhaps a friendship with the pinkett wouldn't be so bad. He dipped into his kunai pouch and pulled out a small brown pill and tossed it to Sakura. Eat that, it'll give you energy for about 5 hours. She looked skeptically back at Naruto before plopping the brown ball into her mouth and bit down on it. At first she didn't feel any different, but after 5 minutes she felt her entire body become energized. It was almost like every atom in her body became electrified and started vibrating. Needless to say, she felt great. She felt as if she could run a marathon around Konoha's outer gate. Naruto saw this and smiled. Now that you have the energy, I have a technique that I would like to teach you, he said as they started walking to their team's training ground. I can't stay long. I have a dinner date later, but I will show you how it's done. Once they arrived at Training Ground 7, he walked over towards a boulder that was about twice the size of himself. He turned towards Sakura and silently prayed that Tsunade wouldn't hate him if revealing the secrets of her strength. Alright, Sakura-chan. The pinkett blushed slightly as he heard him refer to her as Chan again. Watch closely, he said as he started channeling chakra into his muscles and fist. He turned toward the boulder and sent a powerful fist into it before the boulder exploded. Sakura's eyes grew to the size of saucers as she saw the once mighty boulder become nothing more than rubble at the feet of Naruto. What on earth was that? She exclaimed. That was Tsunade Senju's super strength technique. What you do is channel chakra into your muscles and your fist. You release the chakra through your fingertips and then, he demonstrated again by sending a punch to the ground. To no one's surprise, the ground splintered under his fist. Now I want you to practice this until it becomes second nature for you. Break. Naruto sighed as he opened the door to his and Tenten's apartment. He noticed the destined sound of talking. Walking through the hallway from the door to the living room, he smiled happily as he saw Tenten talking with her father, Ojiro. The man noticed his daughter's boyfriend enter the house and sent him a small smile. Tenten noticed this and turned and smiled as she saw the man of her dreams. Naruto-kun, welcome home. I didn't hear you come in. Naruto smiled as he walked over towards the table that sat the father and daughter duo. Yeah, well, I am not in the business of slamming doors, Naruto said, referring to how much the pair were talking. So Naruto-kun, how was your missions for the day? Ojiro said. Naruto sighed as he took a seat next to his wife. He then proceeded to slump down into his chair. Work. Seriously, they're just choirs that anyone could do. Tenten chuckled slightly as she placed a hand on his under the table. Maybe so, but every job brings money into the village, and living together means that we need all the money we can get. Naruto blushed a little at the sincerity in her voice. As a genin, the first time around he learned of how D-ranked missions help support the economy of the village, and later in life as the Hokage he learned how vitally important those choirs were when developing your muscles as a genin. I know, but seriously, pulling weeds, walking dogs and grocery shopping. Our time could be better served training and preparing for higher ranked missions. Well, Ojiro interjected. What do you expect? We're in peace times. It's not like we're training children to fight wars, he said with a wave of his hand. Tenten and Naruto glanced at each other. If only he knew that a large-scale battle would be coming to Konoha's doorstep within the next few months, so much needed to happen before the start of the Chunin exams. While his attempts at making Sakura stronger had earned a positive reaction from the Uchiha, but he still seemed aloof, much like the first time around Kakashi had given them little to no training. So Naruto-kun, how has your team been? Hope you're making friends, Ojiro asked. Slowly, yeah, Naruto said as he smiled. Tenten glanced at him with an arched eyebrow. Sasuke-san is still a bit cold, but he's lightening up. Sakura-chan and I have a steady friendship, he said with a smile. Tenten turned toward him. Sakura-chan, wasn't that the pink-haired girl you had a crush on? Naruto gulped silently. She gave him a cocky smile before crossing her arms over her chest. I don't have to be jealous, do I? Naruto put his hands up in mock surrender. Of course, not Ten-chan. All I am doing is helping with her training. She never took it seriously in the academy. Ojiro chuckled at the boy's antics. Tenten gave him a curt, After an hour of talking between the trio, it had gotten late. All right, kiddos, Ojiro said. It's time for me to get on home, he said as he got up from the table. Naruto jumped up. Allow me to walk you out, Ojiro-san. The elderly man nodded with a smile as Naruto escorted him to the door. As the door was swung open, the cold night air entered the warm apartment. Ojiro turned and looked at the boy. He was proud that his daughter had looked past the hate the villagers had shown the boy. Say Naruto-kun, he said, gaining the blonde's attention. Let me talk to you for a moment alone. Naruto gulped audibly but stepped outside anyway. It didn't matter how many times he had talked with the man alone, it always made him nervous. How do you feel about my daughter? Naruto let out a breath he didn't even know he was holding. Anyone could tell you how a conversation of this sort would make them nervous. One wrong step and you could be hated by your significant other's father for the duration of the relationship. Though Naruto didn't need to worry, he loved her with all his heart. I love her. Ojiro stared into the boy's cerulean blue orbs and failed to detect any form of falsity. He sighed and smiled. I am glad. Are you ready for this? You've taken a big step, and you're still so young. Naruto arched an eyebrow in confusion, but he assumed that he was talking about how they were now living together. I know, sir, but I know I love her and she loves me. Yeah, he said as he looked up thoughtfully. I've seen it in her eyes. She had the same expression Chi-Chi used to have. Naruto went silent at that. He hadn't known Chi-Chi, but from what future Ojiro had told him, she was a lot like Tenten and he loved Tenten. The father waved his goodbye before walking off into the night. Naruto was confused because of the man's words but was happy nonetheless that he was accepting of his relationship with his daughter. Walking back inside, he noticed Tenten sitting on the couch with her legs on the couch. Her brown hair that was previously tied into double buns was now unbound by her hair ties. So, she started, did you and Tu-san have a good talk? Naruto narrowed his eyes suspiciously. She knew something about his little talk with her father. Yay. He said something that odd to me. She hummed. What was that? He said I took a big step and if I was ready for this. I know living together is huge, but I don't know if I would describe it as a big step. Tenten smiled lightly as he pucked up her legs and sat down before putting her legs in his lap. She looked over at him and felt her heart flutter. Well, I may have told him you asked me to marry you, she said with a smile. The blonde's eyes widened in surprise. That was something he was not expecting. Sure, he had every intention of remarrying her, but it was still so soon. They were still young. Ten-chan were too young to get married. But Naru-kun, she pouted. We're genin, which means in the eyes of the village we're adults. Naruto nodded. Yes, that is true, but the legal age for genin is 15. Tenten huffed and crossed her arms over her chest before looking away from Naruto. The blonde looked at the lovely brunette as she pouted. Well, he started. It seems like a date's out of the question for tonight. It's pretty late. She seemed to slouch down into the couch even further before her expression brightened and she leapt up from the couch. Naruto stared at her as she walked towards their shared bedroom. Once she was standing in the doorway, she removed her top, making the blonde blush furiously as he saw her the back of her black bra. She turned her head and all he could see was her seductive smirk, sultry eyes and the crest of her left. There's more than one way to worship me like a goddess. She turned fully toward him and beckoned him with a single finger as she backed into the room. Naruto gulped audibly. He had to admit that even though he wanted to wait until they were older than even he had needs that could only be satisfied by the women he loved. I've taken all I can and I can't take no more, he said as he walked into the room after his weapon mistress. Underscore a kunai in time. Team 7 stood in the mission room watching helplessly as the wife of the fire daimyo smothered the cat in her meaty arms. Sakura felt bad for the cat while Sasuke sneered at the feline as it had the air literally crushed out of its lungs. Naruto sighed as he saw the cat struggle in its owner's grasp. He would be the first to admit that in his younger years he hated that cat, but as he was being groomed to take the position of Hokage, he became quite familiar with the daimyo, his wife, and her cat. He became quite fond of that lazy fluffball. It reminded him of another fluffball that kept giving him a hard time. All right, Team 7, the Hokage started, you did a fine job. Now on to other matters, we have 2 more missions available: painting council women Mebuki's fence or walking elder Homura's dogs. Naruto groaned loud enough to gain the attention of the other occupancy of the room. Come on Hokage Gigi, can we please get a better mission? Hiruzen looked at the boy and took a drag of his pipe. Iruka stared at the boy. Naruto, these missions are beneficial to the economy of the village. Naruto finished Iruka's statement for him. I know Iruka-sensei, but I believe the 4 of us can handle at most a C-rank mission. Come on Hokage-sama, Naruto said in a more serious tone. This took the group by surprise as it was commonly known that Naruto wasn't one for formalities. Hiruzen arched an eyebrow, questioning the serious tone in the boy's voice. Team 7 will never be able to show what it can really do by doing those lousy D-rank missions. The group looked at the blonde as if he had grown a second head. Hiruzen took a quick puff of his pipe before removing it from his mouth and sitting up straight in his chair with his arms cupped in front of him. Naruto-kun, what do you mean by, really, show what you can do? Hiruzen questioned. Naruto walked over and placed a hand on Sakura's back where the muscles were beginning to form. Between team meeting and mission, Sakura-chan and I have been working on her taijutsu. I mean, I'm no meta guy, but I am confident that she can handle a simple escort or delivery mission. Sakura smiled at the amount of faith her newfound friend was placed in her. Truth be told, her taijutsu had improved immensely since they started training. She was no longer fainting because she was no longer dieting, and she was gaining muscle mass to boot. Even her body was starting to fill out. Sure, her wear still small, but they have gone from nothing at all to a little bit of something. Between her body filling out and her muscles developing, she had noticed Sasuke glancing in her direction more often. Naruto pointed a finger at Sasuke. And Sasuke's the rookie of the year, he said with a smile, even though on the inside he wanted to vomit. Nothing in this world could make Naruto compliment the arrogant Uchiha, but sometimes sacrifices would have to be made. Sasuke smirked arrogantly as it seemed that even the blonde Jinchuriki had learned his place at the feet of the mighty Uchiha. Besides, we have Kakashi-sensei. He's stronger than any bandit we would come across. The copycat ninja's chest swelled with pride as he heard the praise he was receiving from the blonde. Idiot, even if what you say is true, C ranks are just too dangerous. Rookie genin should not be going on them, Iruka said in an attempt to reason with Naruto. However, the Brunette Academy teach forgot one crucial thing. No one can reason with Naruto. Iruka-sensei, we're not team 8 or 10, Naruto stated in his Hokage voice, something he cultured from a year of doing public speeches. Team 7 is by far the strongest physical team, which would make us the assault team. Team 8 had Hinata-chan, Kiba-san, and Shino-san. Those 3 specialize in tracking. Team 10 is the current Ino Shika-cho, which specialize in trapping. Our real potential would be better shown in the field. Hiruzen was surprised, he categorized each team correctly. Iruka stared slack-jawed at the blonde he saw as a brother while Kakashi arched an eyebrow in the boy's direction. The Hokage hummed as he turned his focus from Naruto to Kakashi. What do you think, Kakashi? Are they ready? The silver-haired Jonin nodded slowly. Naruto is exactly right, sir. Sakura had become stronger while training with Naruto. Both Sasuke and Naruto are possibly on the same level, he said, which gained the ire of the last Uchiha. I would have to say they are more than ready for a simple C rank. Hiruzen nodded before pushing a button on his desk. Send him in, he said as he removed his hand from the intercom. He turned back towards Team 7. Naruto-kun, I would like to congratulate you on your deduction. Since Kakashi believes you three ready, then I would like to give you all a C rank mission. Sasuke smirked while Sakura sighed and Naruto smiled wide. The doors swung open, which gained the group's attention, and a rather portly fisherman stepped through them. In came the portly man with ashen gray hair and matching beard. He wore a dark gray shirt that was almost black with a white towel draped across his shoulders. He had a sake bottle dangling from his left hand. What are these? The ninja that will be protecting me, the old man exclaimed. I asked for a ninja, not children. They look stupid, especially the blonde one, the man said, which gained Naruto's ire. He may not have anything against the man, but Naruto was definitely not a fan of people calling him stupid or an idiot. The man tilted the sake bottle to his lips only to find the bittersweet liquid not funneling into his gullet. He opened his eyes and saw that the bottom half of the bottle had been severed. Looking around panicked, he saw two of the kids looking at the blonde, and the blonde was staring daggers at him. Looking to his right, he saw a kunai impaled in the wall, still dripping with sake. Naruto were supposed to protect the client, not kill him, Kakashi said with a sigh. This is going to be a long mission. Hiruzen shook his head. The client shuddered at the killer intent that radiated from the blonde. My name's Tazuna. I am the master bridge builder from the land of waves. Naruto smiled as he reminisced about his first trip to the wave country. It was there that he met Inari. It was there his resolve to protect those precious to him was solidified. With his first meeting with Haku, it was where Zabuza and Haku were laid to rest. He had to fight back tears as he remembered the two once enemies turned friends who had sacrificed everything to fight for what they believed in and lost everything because of the greed of Gato. Kakashi glanced from their client to his team. All right, you three, he said, gaining the attention of the young shinobi. I want you to pack for a month's worth of travel. We'll meet at the main gates in 10 minutes, don't be late. Naruto scoffed. We should be telling you that, he said as he walked past his sensei and Tazuna before closing the doors to the mission hall behind him. He smirked as he vanished in a flash of yellow before appearing back in the small apartment of his and his soon-to-be wife. If he was to be perfectly honest, he was nervous that Tenten had told her father he had asked her to marry her. This time around he would have liked to have done things right and asked the mont's blessing. Last time they had gotten married, because last time it was a spur-of-the-moment thing he just did. He was so overwhelmed with happiness that he couldn't contain it. He had been planning on asking her, but he had put it off because he hadn't asked Ojiro. Once he looked over the crowd of people as they watched the blonde take his rightful place as Hokage, he was overcome by a sense of pride. His speech was one he had spent more time working on more than any other. He thanked Iruka, Kakashi, Hiruzen, Jiraiya, and Tsunade for giving him the tools to succeed in his shinobi career. He thanked his friends for all the times they had his back when things became hard. Naruto smiled fondly as he remembered the words that followed, and above all else, I want to thank the love of my life, my girlfriend Tenten, for standing by my side when life grew too much for me to bear alone. He turned his cerulean blue eyes towards the women and smiled lovingly as he beckoned her forward. Tenten reluctantly stepped up and in front of the crowd that consisted of everyone that she had fought beside and for. Naruto took her hand in his as he got down on one knee. There was an audible gasp that spread throughout the crowd. The weapon mistress cupped one hand over her mouth as Naruto pulled a small box from his pocket. Will you marry me? The words rang within young Naruto's mind as he walked through the apartment. He turned the corner of the hall into the living room and saw what might have been the most angelic sight he had ever seen. Laying there before him was his beloved wife-to-be curled up on the couch asleep. He smiled as he walked over and scooped up the unconscious girl in his arms bridal style and walked her into the bedroom before laying her down and collecting the things he would need for the trip. He grabbed 3 outfits, some underwear and socks before throwing them in a backpack and making his way out of the room as quietly as possible as to not wake the sleeping girl. Moving onward to the kitchen, he threw a few cups of instant ramen in his bag. Normally Tenten would yell at him packing the cups because they were not very good for a shinobi in training, but it was the most readily available meal he had. He only packed 3. Anything else he needed he could hunt for. Walking out of the kitchen, Naruto went over towards a chest he kept next to the couch. In it was where he kept his stash of ninja tools. He grabbed an extra 40 that, when added with the 10 he kept on his person, equaled out to be 50. He stuffed 30 explosive tags into a pocket on his backpack and another 5 into his kunai pouch, and finally the tool that helped immensely when they faced off against Zabuza, 1 windmill shuriken. Naruto-kun, came the tired voice of his weapon goddess. He turned around and saw her standing in the doorway. "What ya doin'?" He smiled. "Just getting my things together. I have 8 minutes left to get to the main gates for the mission to Wave Country." Tenten nodded before walking over and sinking down to his level and throwing her arms around him. She stared into his deep cerulean pools and he in return stared into her rich earthen eyes before closing the distance between them in one searing kiss. She pulled away. "I am going to miss you," she said softly as she rested her forehead on his. Naruto smiled before moving in for another quick kiss. "Don't say that. With your missions and team training the month will fly by." He paused and looked at the girl. She was pouting and giving him her signature Tenten puppy dog eyes. "I'll miss you too, Haim." She smiled as she buried her face into his shoulder. She loved it when he called her his princess. It always made her feel special. She still didn't like that he was going to be away for a month and was half tempted to sneak off and follow them to Wave. It's not like they wouldn't need the help, what with the demon brothers and Zabuza, not to mention Haku. But she couldn't do that. Her team needed her in the village for missions and training. "At least let me walk you to the main gate," she pleaded. Naruto took one look at her and responded with an, "Of course." Soon after, the duo exited the apartment and made their way to the main gates that connected Konoha with the rest of the world. Along their way they talked idly about this and that, nothing too overly important until the concept of marriage came up. "I want something traditional, like our first wedding but a bit bigger," Tenten said with a slight gleam in her eye. Their first wedding was simple, just their friends and family. The clan heads came to wish the Namikaze couple luck in their future together. The Akamichi catered the event. You should have seen Choji's mom frantically planning out the hors d'oeuvres and appetizers. Choji had suggested having all-you-can-eat barbecue and ramen. You should have seen the look of rage that passed over both her and Tenten's face. Hinata and Hanabi helped with the bride's dress, and if Naruto had any room to talk he would say they outdid themselves. It was a little-known fact that Hinata loved to sew, and if the dress she made was any indication, she was damn good at it too. It was a moderate dress that showed off a little skin but not by much. Tenten was never one to flaunt her beautiful skin after all. The dress was long and flowing at the bottom and hugged her natural curves perfectly. At the waist the dress parted slightly into snowflake-like patterns, and in the center showed off her navel as well at the center of her stomach. The dress had 2 connecting cups for her S and was held together by an intercut series of hooks at her back. A lot the good the dress did her, because once they retired to their home she shed it for a more comfortable birthday suit. "I like the one we had, all our friends and family." The dress Hinata and Hanabi made was amazing too, Naruto said, which gained a nod of agreement from the weapon mistress. They were so busy talking that they hardly noticed that they had arrived at the gate. Sakura was the first to greet them as she was Naruto's friend. "Hey Naruto-kun," she greeted warmly before noticing Tenten. "Hello, I don't believe we've met. I am Sakura Haruno, Naruto-kun's teammate." Tenten acknowledged the girl with a smile, but on the inside, she was rolling her eyes. She had nothing overly bad to say about the Pinkett, but she was also not overly fond of her neither. She had verbally and physically abused Naruto during their childhood in the academy and even on the same team, as well as broke his heart later in life. The fact Naruto befriended the loud girl again astounded her. "My name's Tenten. I am Naruto-kun's girlfriend." The young brunette's words caught them by surprise, Sakura, because while she knew Naruto had moved on from her, she was surprised that the girl wasn't someone she knew from the academy like Hinata. Sasuke was surprised because he couldn't believe that someone so pathetic as Naruto could get with a decently attractive girl. Tazuna, who had overheard the conversation, smirked and nodded in approval, silently wishing the kid luck with the relationship, while Kakashi smiled. "If I remember correctly, you're from Guy's team. How did you get to know how Knucklehead?" Kakashi stated while ignoring the glare he received from the blonde about being called a knucklehead. "Well, I found him training in one of the old training grounds a few years ago and we became friends." Naruto couldn't help but respect how easy his wife found it to come up with lies. He himself struggled with it when he was confronted with using his father's technique during Team 7's final test. Luckily he wasn't some ordinary child, or he wouldn't have gotten away with it. After kissing Tenten goodbye, they made their way out of the main gates that led out of Konoha. Being the experienced ninja Naruto he was constantly using his ability to sense negative emotions ever since he left the village, and it located two individuals that seemed to be stalking the Genin team. The blonde time traveler smirked slightly as he felt the presence of what he could only assume was the demon brothers moving from their position to where they would attempt to ambush the team. Last time Kakashi allowed the demon brothers to attack without doing a thing about it, leaving his woefully unprepared Genin to fight off the Chunin missing nin by themselves. This time, however, they were ready. What he had said was no lie. Sakura was well on her way to being a great shinobi. There was little to no doubt in his mind that when the Chunin exams rolled around, that this time she would make it to the final round. As for Sasuke, as much as it made him sick to think about, was one of the best Genins that had come out of Konoha. While he wasn't nearly at his peak physical condition, he could use a fraction of his future power. "Tazuna-san." The silence that surrounded them was broken by Sakura. "You're from the land of waves, right?" This question gained the attention of all her companions. "Yeah, well, why hire us and not ninja from your country?" Naruto smirked as he turned to face her while walking backward. "Sakura-chan," Natuto said, interrupting his sensei that was about to speak. His sudden voice gained the attention of his team and client. "The land of waves don't have a shinobi village anymore," he said while stressing the word anymore. He was in the unique position to make his life a bit better as he resigned to letting his team know of his clan. The Pinkett arched an eyebrow in confusion. Kakashi raised his one visible eyebrow as if questioning his blonde charge. Naruto sent him a reassuring nod and smile. The Jonin decided that he would trust the boy's judgment on this matter. "What do you mean, anymore?" The young Jinchuriki turned around to face the path. His face adopted a sad expression. His heritage was always a sore subject for him, especially his mother. The land of waves used to have the village of Uzugakure, but during the Second Shinobi War it was destroyed. Sasuke scoffed. "They don't sound so tough." Naruto sneered at hearing this. The Uzumaki clan, which made of 3/4 of the village's population, were amongst the strongest clan to ever exist in the ninja world. On par with their cousin clan the Senju and the Uchiha. Kakashi saw the look on the blonde's face. Actually, it took a combined effort of Kumo, Kiri and Iwa to even consider attacking that village. Even then, casualties were high on both sides. Sasuke rolled his eyes at his sensei's words. Sakura stared on in awe. "It sounds like Uzu was strong." "How do you know so much about this place, Dobi?" questioned Sasuke. Naruto looked up towards the sky and his eyes seemed to gleam as a smile spread across his face. "My birth mother was from that village," he said. Sakura smiled at hearing the amount of emotion in her friend's voice. Sasuke looked at him with raised eyebrows. Tazuna stared at the young monk's back. His focus was on the red spiral on his black shirt. "What's you man kid? Naruto Uzumaki." Tazuna D topped in his tracks at hearing the surname. The others stared at him, but Naruto and Kakashi, since they already knew of the ties Uzumaki had with the surrounding villages of Wave. Uzumaki is in. Yup. Kakashi said in a lazy voice. Naruto here is the son of the last surviving member of the Uzumaki clan. This got a reaction from the three who had not already known of his heritage. Sakura stared wide-eyed at the blonde's back. She had no idea that his family originated from another village, let alone a clan. Sasuke stared harder at Naruto's back. The ends of his lips curled up slightly to the point that if you looked close enough you could make out the smallest of smiles. Wow, I had no idea, Sakura said while rushing up and standing beside the blonde. You never said anything. Naruto nodded. One person doesn't make a clan, so I never saw much of a point. They walked in silence before Kakashi noticed his blonde charge's eyes snap to something in the road. Following his gaze, the silver-haired Jonin noticed he was looking at a puddle. He smirked underneath his mask with pride that the boy noticed something so many would have overlooked. He sighed, however, when he noticed the other two seemed not to have noticed it. Suddenly the blonde snapped back towards the puddle as he sensed the chakra spike and noticed the demon brothers charging them. Sakura gasped as the brothers wrapped Kakashi in their chains and ripped him apart. One down, exclaimed one of the missing nin. Sakura's eyes widened, but thanks to her training she knew that if she stuck to what she was taught that she could handle nearly anything. She pulled a kunai from her pouch and stood protectively between Tazuna and the missing nin. Naruto saw this and smirked proudly that after all that training she had started to develop a backbone. One of the demon brothers charged at the blonde, but in contrast to last time when he froze, he was ready as he sidestepped the jab that was aimed for the center of his chest. Naruto gathered his chakra into his palms as he slammed them into the side of the missing nin's chest. The effect was instant as the man was shot off, creating distance between him and Naruto. Though even then he wasn't done as he shot a poison chain dagger in the blonde's direction that was deflected as the Jinchuriki channeled chakra into his foot and used the appendage to guide the dagger above him before he grabbed at the chain and pulled with all his chakra-enhanced might. Having underestimated the genin, the brother had little chance to protect himself from being pulled into the blonde's waiting fist. Naruto punched the man in the jaw with Tsunade's super strength, sending the scraggly-haired man into a large boulder. The brother slumped his head as he fell unconscious. Naruto smirked as he looked down at his fist and clenched it. His power was slowly returning. Little by little, he was becoming his true self. Maizu! Shouted his brother Guzu, which gained the blonde's attention, as he turned to face his next opponent. In his peripheral vision, he saw Sasuke weaving some very familiar hand signs and backflipped away before Guzu's gauntlet could impale itself into his chest. Fire release. Fireball jutsu. A large ball of fire was blown from the Uchiha's maw, which made Guzu retreat briefly before he recollecting himself and lashing out at what he assumed was the weaker amongst the three genin. The straight-haired brunette jabbed his gauntlet toward Sakura's head, but she was expecting it and parried it before kneeing the man in the chin. The remaining demon brother fumbled backward as he clutched his chin. Regaining his composure, he glared heatedly at Sakura before attempting another attack. Sakura was ready for it as she winded up for straight jab, but before she could, Kakashi jumped down from a tree and caught the brother in a lariat. The silver-haired Jonin turned to face Sakura and I smiled. Good job protecting the client, Sakura, Kakashi said before walking over and patting Sasuke and Naruto on the head. You all did great. Naruto couldn't help the smile that broke out across his face. Sasuke grew annoyed at the physical contact. The blonde turned to gaze at his pink friend and a sense of pride filled his heart. He had taken a fangirl with little to no physical training and turned her into a functioning genin. Sakura saw that his eyes were on her and smiled back at him, offering him a silent thank you. Now, Kakashi stated as he turned towards the elderly bridge builder. You have some explaining to do. Tazuna's sweat dropped before explaining the situation in Wave Country, how Gato not only transported good but also drugs, money and anything else illegal. How the country was poor because of their inability to export or JM port trade, and how the tyrant had monopolized it. How anyone who opposed the man would find thugs being sent after them or their families being either threatened or physically abused. I see, the silver-haired Jonin said as he adopted a thinking pose. That is indeed awful. Tazuna looked at the man with hope in his eyes. So you'll help. Kakashi at the man and saw the hope that filled them, he sighed and looked at his genin. This was supposed to be a C rank mission, but now it's the A B rank, maybe low A rank, he sighed again while rubbing his neck. We should return to the village, he glanced at Naruto. What do you kids think? The blonde snorted. I say we continue, Naruto said with confidence even though his instincts as a Hokage was telling him otherwise. He knew he could handle it. Sakura was getting better and could only improve from where SGE currently was, and Sasuke, as much as it pains him to say, can handle himself in a fight just fine. We easily took care of those two, he motioned with his nose where the two unconscious missing nin were tied up. I think we can do this. Sasuke chuckled arrogantly. I am an Uchiha, an elite. Naruto scowled at the self-proclaimed avenger. If Naruto-kun and Sasuke-kun are going, then so am I, Sakura said with a smile. She would not let them outdo her. She was already so far behind them that it wasn't even funny. She would be damned if she let them get farther away. A kunai in time. Wow, it's so huge, Sakura said as she stared at the incomplete bridge above them. Kakashi I smiled at his students as he read his little orange book. Keep it down please, said the fairy man. We gotta remain quiet or they might tax notice of us. Sakura quitted down and they enjoyed the rest of the boat ride in relative silence. The only sound that could be heard was the subtle crashing of wakes in the water they found themselves floating in. Before long they made it to the shore before they resumed traveling by foot. The forest surrounding the village they were heading to coated the ground. The blonde started using his Jinchuriki ability to sense for any form of negative emotion. It wasn't too hard to sense Zabuza's presence. He smirked as he moved his hand to his kunai pouch without alerting Zabuza or his teammates. There! He shouted before hurling the kunai at the place that he knew the missing nin was. He sensed his disappear and reappear on a tree behind him. Sakura's knees were shaking from the sudden outburst of her blonde friend. Naruto walked into the bush to retrieve him kunai, and to Sakura's surprise it came back with a snow-white rabbit. Naruto baka, are you trying to give me a heart attack? Sakura shouted. Naruto just looked at her and shook his head. You're too young and healthy to have a heart attack. Besides, you should thank me for catching dinner, he said with a smile as he held the rabbit by its ears. Kakashi stared at the rabbit. Naruto may be able to fool Sasuke and Sakura but not a well-trained and experienced jonin like himself. He knew someone was there. A white rabbit. It's spring, it should be brown. That's when he felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end as he heard the faint shoot of a blade being hurled through the air. Everyone get down, Kakashi shouted as he grabbed Tazuna and at the ground. For his part, Naruto dived at Sakura and tackled her to the ground. Sasuke ducked as the blade passed over his head. A part of Naruto's mind cursed as he had hoped that he would have got caught by the blade and died. It would save him the trouble of killing himself. The large blade buried itself into a tree and the group saw a man appear on the hilt of the massive blade. Well, if it isn't Kakashi Hatake.